How you doing? Good evening. Welcome to Community Crossfire, Another Point of View. I'm your host, Norman Oliver. I hope you've been enjoying our Black History Month series with Sylvester Wolford, who is increasingly and slowly becoming one of the most important guys or authoritarians in Black history statewide. I mean, not necessarily dealing with just local issues, but dealing with national issues. He's a researcher, a guy who likes researching issues, and I think that he does an excellent job talking about it. I mean, last week we talked about genealogy, and a lot of folks called in because they were searching for loved ones, and they called me in my office, and I kind of connected them with Sylvester Wolford. Before I get started, ladies and gentlemen, it's a weird thing that happens. I'll give you guys information. I tell you what's going to happen in the city, in the state, in the county. I give you 3 years notice, 2 years notice, but you don't believe me until you read it in the newspaper. But if you look at community, I was talking to a friend, and he said, Norm, sometimes you tell us information, my wife and I, he's my fraternity brother and a good lawyer here in the state. He said, my wife and I watch your show every Sunday, but sometimes you talk about issues that we can't really follow because we don't know. But trust me, everybody else knows, or some of the issues that I talk about you know that they might not know. So I try to keep you abreast of what's going on. Let me deal with the county executive situation first in this Stoltz project. Ladies and gentlemen, if Tom Gordon, if you are in his way right now, move. Run, because he's going to punch somebody. I mean, I think that he's pretty much totally ruined Paul Clark's political career. And again, because there's only one paper in town, and most people who read the paper here, it's like gospel. Then it looks like he's trying to tie Chris Coons into a lot of this stuff. And I don't know what's going on. It seems to me that the judges are going to make the ultimate decision on that whole project. I'm going to try to get maybe Councilman Penrose Hollins on maybe in March after the dust settle, after we quit doing the Black History Month celebration. But some stuff is going on that Tom Gordon right now, he's not the one to be messed with. And also you do realize that Tom Gordon's a very good friend with the Vice President of the United States. The Vice President of the United States' son is Beau Biden. and speaking of that, and also I do want to commend Tom Gordon for appointing Maurice Pritchett as the educational guru for the county. See, that's why you listen to me. I give you didn't know that, did you?
I didn't know that.
Of course you didn't know. See, you look at me and you find out. Maurice Pritchett is now working for the county executive, and he's going to be in charge of, I guess, bringing some of the educational issues that affects the county. I don't think the county executive could have picked a better person. I think Maurice Pritchett is more knowledgeable than most people in this state, definitely in this city when it comes to educational reform, when it comes to students, when it comes to community. I think that that's a great hire. But that Stoltz thing is getting out of hand. Also, but know what it brings to mind, the Democratic Party. Tom Gordon right now, I don't think he's necessarily an end guy with the Democratic Party, so I think that makes it interesting. I don't know if Chip Flyers is necessarily end guy with the Democratic Party, and I don't necessarily think that Dennis Williams is. I think these guys have won despite of. And what's going to be interesting, listen to me again. Listen to me again. Now you have John Dinella, who's the chairman of the Democratic Party, and John Dinella's a friend. John Dinella's daughter, I'm hearing, so you hear it here first before you read it on TV, hear it in the paper. His daughter Betsy is running for the county chairman of the Democratic Party. I hear Mark Morvani is interested in the state Democratic Party chairmanship, but now he's the city chairman. I hear Gary Hutt is interested in the city chairmanship. Wow, see how I break that down? So if the Republican Party couldn't get out their own way in the state, they probably could make some moves, but they can't get out their own way. So the Democratic Party will figure it out. And then this is what's going to happen. Beau Biden, who's the Attorney General, is going to run for governor or U.S. Senator. I think governor. So where does that leave Matt Dinn? Me personally, I don't think Matt Dinn will primary Beau Biden. Not unless he has the heart. Now, Jack Markell had the heart to primary John Carney. Will Matt Dinn have the heart to primary Beau Biden if he wants to run for governor. I believe that they will offer Matt Dent, say, okay, you run for Attorney General, we'll help you out, or we'll give you a judgeship. That's my opinion. Keep tuned. Also, it's a lot of stuff happening at Connections. Connections is a mess. I've got like 10, 15 phone calls about that. I think that we have to find a way to help the homeless. I mean, I can't beat up on the homeless population. But I hear that this guy is a guy who has a contract down at Connections for like $500,000. I can't get a $2,000 contract. They say this guy have a $500,000 contract and he's on a run and won it in Florida.
Incredible.
I hear that he's going to go to court here in Delaware, right? Because I didn't get the full story. I get so many phone calls, it's crazy. Then Loretta Walsh, Councilwoman Walsh, is asking for an audit. God, man. See, that's why you have to tune in to get the information here. I got to get some folks on and start talking about this crime. See, I mean, every time like somebody gets shot, you know, they call Chris Barrison, those guys, investigative reporters, and then they do like a 5-page, you know, and it makes it look like they know what the hell they're talking about. No, they don't. We need to get people who really are on the ground floor, who really know what they're talking about. And you know, I'm going to tell you another person that you better not sleep on, Nancy Willing. How does Nancy Willing, I went to Delaware Way, is that her website?
That's it.
Blog, what is it, Delaware Way?
Delaware Way.
Delaware Way?
Yes.
Nancy Willing knows more that's going on in the county than anyone. She has, I went to her website, her blog, she has all the emails on her blog. She had the information before the news journal had it. So somebody's leaking stuff. It's a mess, man. It's a mess. All right, well, how you doing? Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be taking phone calls tonight, but we're going to get into some of these issues that I'm talking about now, the county, and I think Tom Gordon, he got to be thinking about a statewide office. I think Dennis Williams is going to be hot for a statewide office. And you know, it's interesting. I was thinking about this today. I see Cory Booker from Camden, the mayor. He's running for U.S. Senator. Mm-hmm. You had Ed Randall, who was the mayor, ran for governor. Most mayors, when they're powerful in the number one city, they get statewide appeal. Only city of Wilmington. I mean, what, Dan Frawley didn't, Jim Baker didn't, Jim Seals didn't, and I don't understand it. Maybe Dennis Williams will break it. If Dennis Williams could figure out this crime problem, I think Dennis wants to say crime, then economics. I think economics, then crime. I think he has a great shot. I think Tom Gordon. It's going to be interesting. I'm just going to follow the, but I'm a duck. I don't want to get one of those punches by Tom Gordon. He knows the FBI. So, Sai, what's going on with some of the what do you got going on, ladies and gentlemen? I'm Sylvester Wolford. Again, like I said, he knows more about Black history than a whole lot of you guys. So, what's going on?
Let me clarify what I know and what I don't know.
Hold on for a minute. Okay, now go ahead. I wanted to make sure the camera was on you.
Oh, okay. Basically, I kind of pick my projects. And the first project I picked was my family over in Newark because, as I said, they got left out of the history book. And then I was worried about the U.S. colored troops getting left out of the celebration of the Civil War. The next project I actually took was Howard High School, because you and I know Howard High School has an incredible history, and we know that now it has a different mission. And the folks who are on that mission, and God bless them, and we wish them the best, but the new mission has nothing to do with the old mission, and the old mission has to be preserved because.
So you've done some history on Howard High School? I've
done some history on Howard High School.
Talk to me.
Well, I gave a presentation last year, okay, on the legacies and legends of Howard High School. The legacy being, how did Howard High School get started? And again, you know, I don't declare.
How did it get started?
I was going there.
You know I was going to cut you off. You know, people tell me let you talk. No, last week they said, why don't you let the guy talk? All right, go to let you talk.
No, interrupt me anytime. But that's where I was going. Okay. Howard High, and again, I had to learn this stuff. And again, as you're sitting here now, asking me, how did Howard High School get started? I was sitting there a couple years ago saying, gee, I wonder how Howard High School got started. General Oliver Otis Howard, whom Howard High School is named after, okay, was head of the Freedmen's Bureau. The Freedmen's Bureau had responsibility for resettling the 4 to 5 million slaves after the Civil War. He had to make sure they had a place to stay, make sure they had educational systems, make sure they had resources, set up a bank for them, Freeman Savings Bank.
Wow.
Yeah, okay.
What year was this?
Right, the Freedmen's Bureau started in 1864, the year before the end of the war. Okay. But it continued for another 3 or 4 years, and we get into different issues that came up. Reconstruction, we're back to Reconstruction, and the Reconstruction issue is there were black U.S. senators and there were black U.S. representatives in Washington, et cetera, and there were some
Ralph Blunt and all those guys.
There were some folks who didn't.
Yeah. May I chime in?
Go right ahead.
Is this the same Howard who started Howard, the college, Howard University? Howard
University is named after General Howard. There are probably about 15 high schools around the country named after General Howard.
White guy.
A one-armed white guy. He
Wow.
lost his.
No, this is good to know.
You're absolutely right.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm as not a historian, I'm a researcher, so I had to go back and research this. And just an incredible story. And I said that he started a bank. He started Freeman Savings Bank. And that project, as many black projects, and we don't have to go into all the black projects, that project went bad. The only black folks who had money after the Civil War were the U.S. colored troops. There were 180,000 of them. And they had gotten paid for being in the Army, and some of them got pensions for being in the Army. And so they took that money and they didn't have any place to put it, so they put it in Freeman Savings Bank. What happened in 1872, which is not a long period of time, it's like 70 years, was something called the Long Depression. We know about the Great Depression, 1929. We know about the depression we're in right now, okay? But this was the Long Depression, happened for the same reason that all these other depressions have had. People were speculating on land, land values were going up, the bubble burst, okay? And Freeman Savings Bank collapsed. And you go, well, it was just another bank collapsing. No, this was all the money that black folks had in the whole country was in this bank. This was the only black bank.
And where was it located at?
They started off in New York City, okay? And in New York City, they were under control. They only could buy government bonds. And so they were buying government bonds, they were taking in money, and they were paying a small amount of interest on the loan. Somebody said, great speculators said, we shouldn't be in New York City, we should be in Washington, D.C., and we should have a gigantic building, you know, to prove that we are stable. So they moved out of New York City, moved to Washington, D.C., built a gigantic building, started speculating on land rather than buying government bonds. They started, now we would say they started building shopping centers and they started building housing complex and all those kinds of things. They were doing all kinds of stuff. The market collapsed, took everybody out. For the next 40 years, okay, there were all kinds of bond or petitions made to the government and all types of congressional hearings on trying to get these black folks their money back.
This is 19 what? So, because you're moving up.
We are right after the Civil War. 1972, the Long Depression, the money's gone. And the money's, when I say the money's gone, I mean nobody got a dime. I mean, I'm talking about people who only had 50 cents, okay? And the 50 cents is gone, okay? And it's in litigation into the 1900s. In the 1900s, they were still trying to get these folks back their money. And this is significant because we are coming out of slavery. We as a people are coming out of slavery, and we have to know how to function in the society. And as you know, you need a bank. You need a banker. You put your money in the bank, okay, and you make loans at the bank, et cetera, et cetera. And this destroyed the confidence of the black community in terms of the banking system. Okay?
So way back then?
Way back then, 1872.
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've been enjoying our series on Black History. Sylvester Wolford again. I hope you're enjoying this conversation as much as I find it fascinating. Every time I talk to this guy, he always brings more to the table than I knew. What part of it was a part of the country I remember doing some of my studies that everyone, what they call, I mean, it was some rich folks in this part of the country, one of these states. You know what I'm talking about?
Rich black folks?
Yeah.
I believe it was someplace out in Oklahoma, as I recall.
Okay.
And again, I'm not sure what the economic motivation was. Again, it could have been oil or it could have been whatever. There had to be something that the black folks had out there that we don't have here.
Let's go back to what you were talking about then. Even with that, so right now there's money out there that some of these servicemen had in this bank.
Right.
That's never been recovered.
Never been recovered.
And so some of their families could have been wealthy. Right. I mean, because a lot of times old money, like DuPont money, will go on generational and forever.
Sure. But the issue is this is a debate. And when I say it's a debate, this was a depression. It was called the Long Depression. It lasted from 1872 to 1879. White folks lost money, if I may say that. Okay, so
you can say it on this show.
I can say I can say it on this show. So when you went to Congress and said we have to give the black folks back the money, the folks said, well, we giving the white folks back their money. And then they got into this serious debate. In this Freedom Savings Bank, there were some white folks who had money in the bank, and there were some petitions which said we should give black folks back their money, but we don't have to give the white folks back their money because the white folks shouldn't have the money in the bank anyway. And all of these kinds of debates and discussions are going on. It's like you and I are having this discussion over beer, but they're fighting over this in Congress.
Let me ask you another question. Let me go another way. So whatever happened to the 40 acres and a mule?
40 acres and a mule. The only chance of 40 acres and a mule was this Freeman's Bureau. Okay. The Freeman's Bureau, again, was resettling folks and making sure they didn't starve to death. Okay. And there was no 40 acres and a mule. There were education. They were doing education systems. The schools were built by the Freeman's Bureau. The bank was part of that. But there never was a we're gonna compensate, blacks for their years of slavery.
Well, where did that myth come from then?
I think it was proposed once. I think it was somebody said, why don't we get, somebody could said, we should get 40 acres and a mule for 200 years of slavery.
You said when we were talking in the green room, you were saying you were doing some study on the 8 slaves or 8 something.
It is an issue that has just come up. The last time when I was talking about my mother's side of the family, that was 4 years of research, and most recently I've talked about my father's side of the family, the Wolford side of the family, and I traced them back to Dorchester County, Maryland, and there's a town called Wolford in Dorchester County, and Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass came out of slavery in Dorchester County, significant. And Harriet Tubman was running her operation of the Underground Railroad, primarily getting her family out of Dorchester. She kept making trips back and forth to get her brothers and sisters and eventually her mother and father out of Dorchester County. Well, I made the connection of the Dover 8 because there were 18 slaves that Harriet Tubman was trying to set free. She didn't think she could take 18 of them through the woods and the swamps at one time, so she had 8 of them that she put together, and she gave them conductors to meet on the Underground Railroad. They were going to go to a Reverend Samuel Green, and then to her father Benjamin Ross, and then to a guy in Dover on Thomas Otwell. Now, the way this ties into my family genealogy is that 2 of the Dover 8 had the last name Wolford. Now you say, well, they must have been relatives of yours. No. Roger Wolford owned half of Somerset County and half of Dorchester County. There were like 30 families called Wolford in Dorchester County. There were 30 white families and 30 black families in Dorchester County. And in 1850, when Harriet Tubman was running the Underground Railroad, there were still 150 slaves on plantations owned by Wolfords. Okay? And this is an issue of our genealogy. You and I were talking about genealogy and finding our way back to the plantation. Is that what we're looking for? And again, as I keep saying, trying to clean up this story, whatever the story is, we got to celebrate it. So I say, hey, I came from Roger Wolford in Dorchester County, and he owned, 150 slaves, and there were white free blacks, and there were whites there, and I'm a Wolford from Dorchester County. We have to say that and celebrate it. Otherwise, we have to hide from it.
If you don't mind, I would like to jump around.
Sure.
Just because of our timing, and I think you've been doing an incredible job, and I want to thank you again for coming on the show the last 3 weeks and sharing with my audience your knowledge of Black history, and your studies, right? Just in your own way, who would you consider like the 3 most dynamic or events when it comes to Black history? You understand what I'm saying? What major events or people or person would you say contribute to freedom? Or Harriet Tubman, of course, like that. Does anything come to mind?
Well,
or is that a trick question?
I don't know whether it's a trick question, but I'll give you a trick answer.
Okay.
Okay. And the trick answer is many of the folks we hold up as being great black role models or great black individuals weren't all black.
Right. That's why I asked you.
Okay.
That's why I said.
Frederick Douglass' father was white.
Okay.
Okay. So, and this gave them a certain privilege. They gave them, in many instances, access to education because their father was white and they had access to it. There's a guy that I've been researching by the name of Robert Purvis, who was considered in many circles the president of the Underground Railroad. He was the guy out there, bringing the money in so that the folks. He was only 1/4 black, okay. But I give him great credit for basically funding the Underground Railroad, and he went to Europe. The anti-slavery movement and the abolitionist movement in America, believe it or not, started over in Europe because the English were trying to end slavery throughout the British Empire. So he used to go to England and get money from the anti-slavery movement over there and bring it back and feed the system to freed slaves. And Purvis, again, himself, his white father, I may say so, died, left him money. He and his brother graduated from Amherst. And again, it's a case of, in order to make a significant contribution, you got to have money. And I'm not telling you anything.
This is good. This is good conversation. Go ahead.
And you got to have education. It was tough for Harriet Tubman, who was illiterate her entire life, to be that person. Because again, she couldn't read or write, and so there were limitations as to how much leadership she could have. So the folks who drove this thing with money and education, and Frederick Douglass ran a newspaper. He started off with a newspaper called the North Star, and then he had another newspaper called Frederick Douglass's Papers.
Right.
So he and again, I don't have to tell you, but we only have one newspaper here, and we don't think it's very good. But in order to present our side of the story, or even to keep our story in historical context, we need someone who speaks from our agenda. And Frederick Douglass was that person.
Wow.
Okay.
I'm gonna jump around because I'm opening up the phone lines. Have you done much research on like the W.E.B. Du Bois's and the Booker T. Washingtons?
I'm not that far up in history. I am back to black folks coming out of slavery. So I'm talking about manumissions. I'm talking about the establishment of the first communities. Black Methodism.
What about like a Nat Turner?
Nat Turner, again, I've briefly gone into, and again, my contact with Nat Turner is Nat Turner's rebellion kind of began to caused the South to worry every day about slave revolts. And so they began to more suppress blacks who were in slavery. They strictly said, we're not teaching you to read or write. We're not. There was one lady who escaped on the Underground Railroad, and they asked her, could she read? And she said, no, my master would give us 30 lashes just be standing next to a book. And an incredible statement. And so there was this intense suppression of blacks because they were afraid of slave revolts. And again, the same thing with John Brown and Harper's Ferry,
Right.
Where the true story of John Brown is John Brown went to Harper's Ferry to an arsenal to get guns. And he was going to go on the plantations and give the guns to the slaves he was freeing, and those slaves were going to go to the next plantation and burn it down and shoot the slave owners and free those slaves, and he was going to give them more guns. And he had a plan to go from Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, which is where he was, straight down to Florida, burning plantations and killing slave owners.
Let me shift the conversation just a little bit, because, like I said, I'm going to jump a lot. Tell me a little bit about the Hocassin School of Color. I was reading that in the paper a lot, and I know you had some involvement. Tell me a little bit about that, the history of that school, because we talked about Howard, and we don't have to go into the legalities of it, just a little history of the Hocassin School of Color. DuPont
built 81 schools, okay? When integration came, and this is not deseg, you kind of have to clarify your terms. I'm talking integration, 1955. Deseg was folks on buses, different story. When integration came in 1955, most of these schools were just padlocked. They locked the door and walked away. All the records were lost in many instances. I went to New London Avenue School in Newark. Every student grade, every record, every picture was thrown away, okay? Some of these schools were turned into senior centers. Absalom Jones in Belvedere is a senior center. Booker T. Washington in Newcastle is a senior center. The Buttonwood School was rehabbed as a museum, and Teal and Jean Petty did an incredible job, you know, of refurbishing that particular school. The one in Christiana, okay, if you've ever rode through Christiana, totally dilapidated. It's been sitting there for 50 years.
Is that the one in the back? Sits in the back off of 273.
Across from Old Fort Church.
I know what you're talking about,
Okay. And just abandoned and left there. The Hocassin Community Center was given to the African American community primarily for social services, for a food cabinet, for community services, etc. Going back to 1950, 1960. It was purchased from the state and given to the Hocassin Community Center to, again, assist where needed on needs of the African American community. Very much involved was the Quaker community, very much involved over the years, again, was Jim Gilliam, okay? The idea there then became, a few years ago, that maybe you should look at expanding the building the same as Buttonwood had been expanded, okay? And you could provide banquets or weddings or dances or those kinds of things. To make a very, very long story short, that project failed. And we are trying to, me and about 10 other people, are trying to recover from that failure.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoy the show. A lot of times folks would like for me to talk about some of the same old, but this is Black History Month, and when I have an opportunity to bring a guy like yourself on just to give up so much history, I'm not going to shy away from it. And I'd rather the person turn to the All-Star game if they don't want to really engage and really learn. Because a white guy called me last week after a show, and he said, "You're absolutely right. White, black, Hispanic, rich, poor, old and young can learn from this kind of stuff, and I think it's important. I hope that that's what folks are doing, and I hope when we open the lines we have those kind of good questions. When you do your history, where does the Renaissance movement, the Harlem Renaissance, have you gotten into that? The whole Langston Hughes, Country Cullen, all
Still
those
in that
guys?
area. It is difficult to.
Because it seemed like and I'm trying to move you up because this is my last week with you, and next week we're going to have Kenyon Camper and Herman Holloway Jr. We're going to talk about some other stuff, really, like some local politicians. I'm doing this like on a more national scale, and touching on local stuff. Have you got a chance to touch on that?
When you get past the when life was simple, there were slaves and they were free. It's easier to do the history and explain the history. When you get to the 1900s, there was so much going on all over the place. There were things going on in New York, in Chicago. The NAACP was starting in Chicago, 1919. As you said, the Harlem Renaissance were going on. The great authors and rights were coming to life. Richard Wright was writing books, and
Ralph
Ellison and James Baldwin and all the black authors. And so it is a tougher story to get out in a half hour or 45.
Yeah, and actually, in that sense, it's easier for people to research and look at that because there's more written on that.
Sure.
You feel
Absolutely.
me? Then what like some of the properties that we're talking about, and you were talking about when folks even here in Delaware just couldn't even walk down the street and look at a person walk down the street.
You're being discriminated against or hated. You just didn't go there. Wasn't part of your world.
Didn't Strong Thurman's daughter, right? Strong Thurman, who was the U.S. Senator forever.
Sure.
He had a black mistress, right?
Sure.
And his daughter just never told a story, right? Was it his daughter or?
Never told a story. Absolutely. And finally it came out by some means.
Have you ever thought about writing a book?